Good afternoon, boys and girls. I'm going to finish reading the Boxcar Children Sea Turtle Mystery. I think I have a way we can figure it out, Jessie said. If we see turtles digging, let's mark the real nest with piles of seaweed and shells so only we know where it is. We'll mark some other spots with flags so if someone digs there, they won't find any eggs. I like that idea, Benny said. Junior Rangers come up with the best ideas. The children walked up and down the beach for a long time without seeing any turtles. Finally, Benny spotted some tracks and followed them right up to a dune. I'll get some seaweeds, Henry said. We should use enough seaweed and shells so we can be sure to find the nest again. Let's count how many steps we take to where we are going to put the flag, Violet said. That way we'll be extra sure we know where to go. Jessie suggested 50 steps would be a good amount. They counted as they walked and then placed a flag when they had walked far enough. What do we do now? Benny asked. I suppose we keep looking for turtles, but we also come back here to check on the nest, Henry said. The Aldens didn't see another turtle until they were much farther up the beach. It was Violet who spotted it. They went through the same process of marking the nest with seaweed and shells and then placed the flag 50 steps away. I'm going to call the ranger, Jessie said. We need to let someone know we found some nests. She punched in the number and gave the ranger the 2 different locations and then hung up. We're going to meet her up by the first nest, she said. They walked back down the beach. I see Martina, Jessie said. She started to run. The others followed. As they got closer, they saw Sandy sniffing the flag and then walking around. Martina stood watching the dog. She had a foam cooler with her. It was just like the one that the Rangers used. The ranger pulled up next to Martina as the Aldens reached her. I can't believe you're stealing the eggs, Violet cried. She looked at the cooler and remembered what the ranger had said about the items they threw into the dumpster. You took a cooler from the ranger station the other night, didn't you? Miss Thacker jumped out of the UTV. What's happening here? Martina looked shocked. I'm not stealing eggs. I'd never do that. She opened the cooler and tipped it so they could see inside. Look, it's empty. Then why do you have it? Asked Jessie. And why was Sandy sniffing around the flag? Martina looked embarrassed. I have been training Sandy to sniff out the sea turtle nests. He has a very good nose and loves to dig. I thought it would be a good way to find nests that aren't marked. The only thing was, I needed something that had the scent of the eggs in order to train him. That's why I took a cooler from the dumpster. I didn't want anyone to know what we were doing until I was sure he could find the nests. Is that why you were out at night on the beach with Sandy? Benny asked. I saw you. That's right, said Martina. Just want to show you this picture. There's not very many black and white pictures in the book. We've been practicing at night. I didn't want Mr. Chapman to see us. He gets so angry when anyone gets close to a nest. The ranger looked at the cooler and then at Sandy, who was sniffing around in a different spot. I have to admit, that is a good idea, she said. How is Sandy doing? As far as I can tell, he's doing very well. But something strange is happening today, Martina pointed out the flag. Someone has been putting flags in the wrong places. Sandy hasn't been interested in those sites at all. He's been sniffing around at what I think are the real nests. For some reason, they are marked with seaweed and a ring of shells instead of the flag. I was about to call you so you could come check and see if I'm right. You are right, Jessie said. We marked the nests so we could try and catch whoever was stealing the eggs. We still don't know who that is. Have you seen anything unusual today? Miss Thacker asked Martina. Martina thought for a moment. I did notice a white van that stopped and seemed to wait for Sandy and I to leave, and when we did, the van drove away. A white van? Asked Henry. I think I know who we should go see next. I'm going to go ahead and read this next chapter. They're off. Jessie snapped her fingers. Mr. Chapman has a white van. I can't imagine it would be him, the ranger said. He cares about the turtles. I don't know why he would take the eggs, but it really might be him. Jessie told the ranger about how Mr. Chapman had lied about being on the beach the day the eggs went missing, and about how they had seen someone give a cooler to a woman outside Mr. Chapman's restaurant. That is very troubling, said Miss Thacker. I should go speak to him, and you all should come along. You kids seem to know what's going on here better than anybody. The Aldens rode with Miss Thacker to the Laughing Gull. Martina and Sandy followed in Martina's car. Outside, Mr. Chapman's white van was in the parking lot, but when the group walked up to the front door, they saw a handwritten sign taped to it, which said, "Closed until Wednesday." There were no lights on. Martina peered through the glass. "That's strange. I thought they were open every day," she said. "Let's go around to the back," the ranger suggested. "I want to get to the bottom of this." Henry knocked on the back entrance. Mr. Chapman opened the door. "I'm sorry, we're closed today." "We'd like to talk to you," the ranger said. "It's important." Mr. Chapman's face turned pale. Miss Thacker walked into the kitchen. The others followed. "Mr. Chapman, we think you've been stealing the turtle eggs," the ranger said. She told him the things that Martina and the Aldens had told her. Mr. Chapman looked ashamed. "I did. I'm sorry. I was only trying to help." Henry couldn't believe what he was hearing. How could selling the eggs help the turtles? "I didn't sell the eggs," Mr. Chapman said. "You just said you took them, and we saw you giving a container to someone who came to the back door last night," Jessie said. Mr. Chapman took out a handkerchief and wiped his forehead. "That was some extra food in that cooler. I give it to the person who runs a homeless shelter on the mainland. The eggs are all here, safe and sound." He led the children to a small room full of big coolers. "I don't understand," the ranger said. "I want to help the turtles," Mr. Chapman explained. "I took the eggs because your method of trying to save them isn't good enough. There are still too many that don't survive once they reach the water. They're too little. I thought if I raised them in a tank until they were bigger, they might have a better chance of survival." "No, Mr. Chapman," the ranger began, very upset. "The turtles won't know how to survive in the ocean if they spent time in a tank. And even if they do survive, they may not breed as adults. I thought you knew that. What you are doing is hurting the turtles, not helping them." Mr. Chapman turned even more pale. Jessie thought he looked like he was going to be sick. "I thought I did know about turtles," he said, "but I guess I still had some things to learn. I was very careful with the eggs. Do you think they'll still hatch?" Miss Thacker looked into each container. "Since you haven't had them long, they still have a good chance of survival. But even if they do survive, what you did was very serious. I'm afraid I'm going to have to make a report, and you will have to pay a fine." Mr. Chapman hung his head. "I understand," he said. "If you will all help me get these eggs loaded into my car, I'll get to work trying to save them as soon as I get back to the center." As soon as all the containers were in Miss Thacker's car, she said, "I hope to see the rest of you tomorrow," she said. A faint smile appeared on her face. "We do have one good bit of news. Some turtles at the station are hatching right now. We'll release them bright and early in the morning. Be there at 6:30 if you want to watch." "We'll be there," Jessie said. The ranger drove off. Mr. Chapman watched her go. "I'm sorry," he said again. "Everything has gone wrong." "Why is your restaurant closed, Mr. Chapman?" Jessie asked. Mr. Chapman looked up at the restaurant building. "I didn't tell Miss Thacker this, but I thought having sea turtles in the tank would help bring people to the restaurant. After all, they are what the island is known for. I needed to do something to help the restaurant. I can't understand why I don't have more customers." "Some people think your restaurant is too fancy," Benny blurted. "They do?" Mr. Chapman sounded surprised. "I didn't know that. What do you mean?" "We can show you if we go inside," Violet said. As soon as they were in the dining room, Violet pointed up to the chandeliers. "They're really pretty, but they're also very fancy." "It's too fancy. I feel like I have to whisper in here," Benny said softly. "I thought having an elegant restaurant would set us apart from other places to eat around here," Mr. Chapman said. But people don't want to come here after being on the beach, Jessie said. They don't want to feel like they have to get dressed up. Mr. Chapman was over to the front windows and looked out onto the beach. Maybe that's why our lunch business is so slow. But I don't know much about decorating. I only know about food. How could I fix it so people would want to come here? What would attract children your age? He asked Benny and Violet. Keep the little boat baskets, Jessie said. I like those. You could make it look like more fun to eat. Here, Violet said. It's not very colorful. The fish are colorful, but everything else is just white and gray. Martina walked around the restaurant. The children are right. It doesn't seem like a beach restaurant. I have an idea, a trade you might call it. I'm an artist. I can help you figure out some new colors and how to change the decorations. Mr. Chapman held up his hands. I don't know. I can't pay you very much at all. You wouldn't have to pay me much if you'd let me show and sell some of my artwork in your entry area. Martina makes shell pictures, Violet said. The tourists like them. Mr. Chapman thought for a moment. I suppose that might work. Why don't you bring some in and let me take a look at them? I have another idea that might help you, and Tommy Fisher too, Henry said. Tommy Fisher? Why would I want to help him? Mr. Chapman frowned. He's having a hard time with his business too. The people he takes fishing have to bring their own food. He's not allowed to provide it, but they don't like it when they run out. You could make picnic lunches for people to pick up before they go fishing or before they spend the day on the beach. Tommy could send them here to order. Mr. Chapman sat down at a table. You know, that's a very good idea. I could do that. I make some amazing sandwiches, if I do say so myself. What kind? Benny asked. He realized he was getting very hungry. Well, since you are here and the restaurant isn't open, let me make you some. If you like them, I'll add them to the menu. The sandwiches were very good. When the children were finished, Martina took them back to the beach. The Aldens spent the rest of the afternoon there. In the evening, Grandfather joined them for a final cookout, but they went to bed early so they could wake up for the turtle release. The next morning, the sun had just risen when the Aldens headed for the ranger station. Park rangers were roping off a narrow strip of sand and putting netting up above it. When the children reached the site, a ranger directed them to a spot behind a rope. Hatchlings use the moon or sunlight shining on the water and the white foam of the waves to help them find their way, the ranger said. White clothing or shoes can confuse them. Those who are wearing white, please move back to stand behind the others. Benny looked down at his shirt. It was blue, and he was happy. He didn't have to move. Henry's shoes were white, so he stood behind Jessie and Violet. Two park rangers walked into the water. Both were carrying long poles with fake owls on the ends of them. The netting and the plastic owls are to keep away the gulls, one of the rangers explained. They try to dive down to get the turtles and eat them. Miss Thacker arrived. A helper set a big box down on the sand. The ranger spoke to the crowd. The eggs have to incubate for about 50 days so that the turtles we are releasing today were collected a couple of months ago. She opened the lid. Violet held her breath. She could hardly wait to see. Miss Thacker took a hatchling out of the box and set it down in the sand, and then she reached for another. Violet couldn't believe how small the little turtles were. Each one was only a little bit bigger than a quarter. Soon there was dozens of little hatchlings pulling themselves toward the surf. They were so cute, Violet said. Jessie began to take pictures. They don't look like the adults, Henry said. The babies are a lot darker gray. Normally these turtles hatch at night, so being dark gray is an advantage, one of the other rangers said. They can make their way to the water in the dark, and it's more difficult for the predators to see them. Why don't you just carry them to the water, Benny said. It's a long way for a little turtle. It is hard for them, but it's necessary. Time spent crawling on the beach is important. These turtles do something called imprinting. We don't understand exactly how it works, but somehow crawling on the beach when they hatch does something to the turtles' brains. Years from now, the female sea turtles that may have traveled thousands of miles away from here will return to the same beach where they hatched and lay their own eggs. That's amazing, Violet said. She and Benny followed the turtles along the roped-off area toward the water. The first few turtles reached the water. The waves toppled them over and over. Some of the crowd gasped. "They can't swim," a girl cried. "Just watch," the ranger said. The little turtles struggled, but within a very short time, they figured out how to move their flippers in the water and made their way out to sea. When the last turtles disappeared into the water, the crowds cheered. Jessie looked out at the water. She imagined the baby turtles swimming on underwater currents. "It would be fun to be a ranger here," she said to Violet. "I like to see the turtles come back year after year." "Yes," Violet agreed. "When we get home, I'm going to go to the library and check out some books on sea turtles." The rangers began to take down the netting and the ropes. The crowd moved away. "Grandfather will be here soon to pick us up," Henry said. "We need to pack." They said goodbye to Miss Thacker, then went back to the campsite. Jessie and Henry took down the tent while Benny and Violet gathered up their gear. "I'm glad you're still here," a voice called. It was Martina. She hurried toward them, carrying her usual bags, and struggled to hold on to Sandy's leash. "Sandy and I wanted to say goodbye." Violet was happy to see Martina. "I was afraid you'd be angry at us because we thought you and Sandy had been digging up the turtle eggs." Martina set down the bags. "I understand why you suspected us. I should have just told the ranger what I was trying to do. It's all right, though. No harm done." She reached into one of the bags and took out 4 little turtles made of seashells. "These are for you, so you can remember Padre Island." "Thank you," Jessie said. This has been such a good trip. We won't ever forget it." "I hope you'll come back sometime," Martina said. "And when you do, maybe you'd like to come on a bird-watching trip with me. Tommy Fisher is doing bird-watching tours now in addition to fishing trips. He's going to hire me to lead some. Between that and selling my shell pictures at the Laughing Gull, Sandy and I should be able to spend plenty of time at the beach." Jessie got her camera. "Let's get a picture of all of us together so we have something to remember." Everyone gathered together for a picture. Jessie held up the camera in front of them. "Say cheese," she said. "No, say turtle," Benny said. "Turtle." Isn't that a good story? I hope you get a chance to read a Boxcar Children book sometime soon. They really are full of all kinds of fun adventures. So I hope you have a good rest of your day. Bye.